says it is being sent somewhere, so hopefully that's right. I will go. There are 4 people in the waiting room, and we have not let them in yet, but I will just send them a message that we're starting in a minute.
And I think we're live now. So I think for those who are watching us online, welcome to the 24-hour Peace Wave. And we're glad to have you here in our annual Peace Wave that we do. So we're gonna start in a minute, and thank you for joining us for today. And before we start, for those who are joining us in Zoom, that will be coming in that time minute, just would like to remind, if you want to have your captions on, please click the CC Show Captions button on the bottom bar. And if you don't see that, just click more and then you will see the captions. And just select your speaking language, then save. Yeah. So again, welcome to the Hawaii and Eastern Pacific region of the Peace Wave. And today we're glad we prepared a lot of things for you today. And we're gonna start off the Peace Wave now. So let me just share you some of the Peace March in Onipas that happened in Hawaii. And later on, we will also join by Anne who prepares everything for this Peace Wave as well. So let me just set up the video to share it with you.
Jeden einzelnen Tag gelangen Tonnen von humanitärer Hilfe nach Gaza. Mahlzeiten werden verpackt und verteilt, dort, wo sie am dringendsten gebraucht werden. Seit dem 26. Mai haben mehr als 50 Millionen Mahlzeiten Familien in Gaza erreicht. Das ist keine einmalige Geste. Es ist eine wachsende, dauerhafte Operation mit einem Ziel, morgen noch mehr Menschen zu erreichen, als wir es heute schon getan haben.
Yeah, so thank you for watching that video. That video is a short video, an overview of a march that happens in Honolulu that marks the 132 years since the illegal Hawaiian Kingdom overthrow. And to give us more like an overview on what's happening to Hawaii and the situation of the militarization in Hawaii, Indo-Pacific, I'm gonna show you this special video that's prepared by Anne Wright and by Kyle Kajihiro to give us the context on what's happening to the Y and West Pacific. So let me just share with you this special discussion.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We're bringing you the 24-hour Peace Wave in the first segment, and it's coming to you from the sovereign nation of Hawaii. And we have with us today a person who will give us a background on what is happening here in the Hawaiian Islands and the Western Pacific. Dr. Kyle Kajihiro, who is a professor at the University of Hawaii and who has been one of the very key people on tracking the militarization of the Hawaiian Islands, first through his work with the American Friends Service Committee and now with Hawaii Peace and Justice and the University of Hawaii. So Kyle, welcome. We're glad you're with us today on the 24-hour Peace Wave.
Aloha, and thank you for having me. And hi to all the folks around the world.
Thank you. Well, would you start us off and tell us the state of militarization in the Hawaiian Islands and the Western Pacific, and how the Indo-Pacific Command, the U.S. Military Command, affects all this? And I'll put up a screen that'll show the map of the Indo-Pacific. But please go ahead, Kyle.
Okay, sure. So I guess just for some setting the context, I think it's important to remember that Hawaii was the sovereign kingdom of Hawaii, as its government was overthrown with the backing of U.S. troops in 1893, and eventually occupied through a very questionable legal process that claimed to annex Hawaii, but without a treaty of annexation, and primarily in order to support U.S. Imperial expansion in the Pacific. And that's always been the key interest of the United States in Hawaii, was to have this outpost, a hub. And so you could say that the first Pacific pivot happened, back in 1893, when the U.S. Enacted what was actually the first regime change of a sovereign country in order to secure the Pacific as an American lake. And as a result of that, Hawaii has become the center of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and its area of responsibility, as you can see in this map, goes from North America all the way to the Central Indian Ocean. It goes from Alaska all the way down to and includes the continent of Antarctica in its area of responsibility. So this is encompassing the majority of the surface of the planet, and most of the world's population falls within the U.S. Indo-PACOM area of responsibility. And that little flag over there in the middle of the Pacific is where the headquarters is. That's actually a facility called Camp Smith over in central Oahu, overlooking Pearl Harbor, or what the original name was, Keawalau o Pu'uloa, the many bays of Pu'uloa. And so this is how Hawaii plays this role of being both a casualty of American empire building and militarism, and now has become a kind of a platform for preparing for war, for doing the command and communications and coordination of wars, and then the exporting of these wars to other peoples and other lands in the region and around the world. And so what's happening, with regard to the state of militarization, given the ratcheting up of tensions with China, and it kind of goes in cycles, but it seems to be in a period of increasing tension, especially with Trump's trade war and kind of belligerent rhetoric. Secretary of Defense had set kind of hostile stance towards China, and his fixation on quote unquote lethality. Hawaii is one of the places military spending has been increasing, whereas in other parts of the defense budget there's been cuts. So yeah, we're concerned about that. On the ground in Hawaii, what that looks like is there's new sort of Army types of training that they're considering it multi-domain training. So I think they're trying to encroach into some of the areas that maybe the Marines and Navy have dominated, including sort of amphibious or ship to land types of maneuver. And so the Army wants more land to be able to do those trainings and to coordinate with other partners around the region. You have the Pacific Missile Range on Kauai is a site where they can test various types of technologies and new weapon systems. It was primarily used for testing missile defense systems, where targets would be launched from the Pacific Missile Range, and then ships would try to shoot it down over the ocean. But it's also used for tracking and doing other kinds of tests with missiles that come from Vandenberg over the Pacific to Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands. And so we have various sites in the islands that are linked to that missile defense system for tracking, telemetry, and those sort of things. And these are all sites that are potentially affected by the ending of leases, and I'll talk about that in a second. Proposal to increase the bombing frequency of the small islet off of Niihau, so at the far western end of the main Hawaiian islands. There's Kauai, Niihau, and then this little island called Kaula. And Kaula is it's uninhabited if you don't count the birds, but it's one of the places where there's thousands of seabirds. It's a preserved for seabirds, but the Navy has controlled access to the island and has used it as a target range for inert bombs, they call it. So and other kinds of gunnery practice. And so they're proposing to increase the frequency of training there tenfold. And are doing an environmental assessment, which is a very low grade of environmental review, and trying to just pass it off as a pass, right, as something that's allowable. And so there's been some resistance to that. And let's see, what are the new things that are happening? We'll get to the leases and the Red Hill stuff later, right? So I'll just leave that off.
If you want to
But-
start it now, fine. However you want to organize it.
Let me just talk about some of the other things in the region, though, because I think that that's also linked to what's happening here. So our brothers and sisters in Guam, and the Northern Marianas Islands, of course, they are closer to these conflict zones, and so they have been fighting against this increasing militarization over in Guam, in the northern part of the island. The Marine Corps base, Camp Blas, has been built, I guess, and it's now open, is what I understand. And the cost of doing that, moving that Marine, unit to Guam, meant that the whole rainforest there was decimated, including the last living specimen of an endangered plant. It was only found in that forest. Everything else was cut down. That tree was left exposed, and then cultural sites have been disturbed. Burials have been removed, and so Chamorro activists there have been protesting. There's another. It would also mean this federalization of lands that were formerly taken by the military, by the federal government, returned to Fish and Wildlife, and then now remilitarized under this new expansion plan. And so areas that have cultural sites that are areas for fishing have become off limits again. And there's a open detonation site that's being used and is proposed for expansion over in the northern part of the island. That's been a source of controversy and protests. And now they're talking about putting in these missile defense launch sites and tracking stations throughout the island, which could have the potential to harm the surrounding neighborhoods and put targets on them, and also disrupt their daily lives, because you have these technologies that require people to stop doing certain things when the technology is in operation. And so that's some of the things happening on Guam. In the Northern Marianas, linked to this expansion in Rota, Tinian, and Saipan, I think. And so there was just recently some hearings over there where the community was coming out and opposing this kind of just increasing takeover of lands and disruption of their lives. Over in Palau, there's also a huge militarization that's happening, and Palau had been sort of left off that map for a while, even though their sovereignty was breached back in the 80s and 90s when the Compact of Free Association was being negotiated, and Palauans voted for not to be anti-nuclear, but that was not acceptable to the United States, and so they forced them to vote. I forget how many times, but basically, they said, no, wrong answer. You can't be anti-nuclear. You can't determine your own policies, because the United States has to have military supremacy over your region. And so there were assassinations, but they had to allow the US to bring their nukes in without announcing, of course, right? Because we don't ask nor tell nuclear status. And so, but it was pretty quiet in Palau until recently with this new push to put in radars and airfields and things like that. So there's about 3 sites in Palau that are being affected, and local folks did not even know. The local communities did not know these things were coming in. They just started seeing workers show up and forests being raised. And it was mainly the national government, I guess, that was making these deals at the expense of the local communities. So we met with some of these high school students actually from one of these sites. They did their own kind of research project and comments on the environmental impact statements, and trying to figure out ways to use even Palau's environmental laws, which are actually quite strong if they were enforced, to use that to try to stop some of these things that are destroying their communities and their environments. See what else is happening. We've got Okinawa is an ongoing disaster. Of course, the expansion of the marine, or the building of a new marine facility over in Henoko in the northern part of Okinawa, has continued to proceed despite daily constant resistance from the Okinawan community. And I think now much of the reef that people were trying to protect has already been destroyed and built over. The last time I was there about 2 years ago, looking from the beach where you could normally see the ocean all the way across, now has just a really high seawall that just encloses that whole area. But they're still having problems in the Oda Bay side of it, where the ocean is deeper and the bottom is much softer. So they were having problems actually sinking pilings down deep enough to be able to stabilize the full length of the runway. So that's an ongoing protest, but I think people are feeling kind of beat down there, because regardless of what they've done, the legal challenges, all the violations of environmental laws and things, the national government of Japan continues to aid and abet U.S. militarization there, which is then spilling over into Guam and the Marianas, into Hawaii. We will probably be getting about 2,700 troops, overflow troops, coming back to Hawaii and be based here. And then in northern Australia, in sort of a rotation of about 2,500 troops through the base. I think it's in Darwin, where again there's a buildup of fuel facilities that will probably be taking some of the red hail fuel when it's distributed throughout the region.
I'll just mention they may not be receiving it because now the Australians have put an injunction against using those tanks because they were built to the standard of a garage withstanding a hurricane, not a fuel facility. So there's a big brouhaha right now that these big tanks that could hold up to 60 million gallons of jet fuel may not be able to be used at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good news if it gets stopped, and bad news if they proceed with it.
Indeed.
Suppose.
Well, why don't we go
Excuse
ahead
me.
and could you mention some about the issues we have here in Hawaii with trying to get land back from the U.S. military?
Sure. So for some context about this issue, the military controls about 250 240,000 or 225,000 acres of land in Hawaii. It varies depending on whether you count owned versus, just occupied. But it's a considerable amount. I think we're one of maybe the second highest percentage of land of any state that's used by the U.S. military. On the island of Oahu, it's about nearly a quarter of the island is used by the U.S. military. Approximately 68% of the land that the military controls in Hawaii come out of the crown and government lands of the Hawaiian Kingdom. So these are like the sovereign lands of the Kingdom of Hawaii that were taken over, and then the military took some of it for use, but they remain in a special status as a trust. So even though the military treats it, as long as they're using it and possessing it, they treat that land as if it's theirs, that they own it. If they ever stop using it, it reverts back to the Hawaiian land trust. And this land trust is what most of the lands that the state of Hawaii controls as its land base, and it has these five defined beneficiaries and purposes under the Hawaii Statehood Act. So the state is actually a trustee for these lands. They're not just the private owner of property. They are a trustee and supposed to meet certain criteria of beneficiaries. So a lot of our public works, airports, harbors, and that sort of thing falls under the trust. But these are lands that also Native Hawaiians have a stake in. 20% of the beneficiary are Native Hawaiians. And so when we're talking about the military's land and its footprint in Hawaii, it's not just a thing of the past that they took this land. It's an ongoing dispossession that enables the military to have its presence and to do all the things it does. Okay, so of all these lands that the military controls, as I said, 68% is coming out of this ceded land or Hawaiian Land Trust. A portion of that was actually became a contentious issue at the time of statehood in 1959, where the state of Hawaii was saying, okay, these lands had to be returned. The military didn't want to relinquish it. And so they struck a deal where the military would have a long-term lease, 65 years for $1. And it's not $1 for 65 per year, it's $1 for 65 years.
Unbelievable.
And it covers about 40,000 acres on different islands and under different branches. So the biggest by far is the Army. They have about 20 something, 30,000 acres of this leased lands on Hawaii Island at the Pohakuloa training area. So it's attached to, adjacent to a larger area that's some of this land of the Hawaiian Trust that the military uses through an executive order of the president. And they treat it as if it's theirs, and they're bombing it and doing all sorts of things. So we don't even know the full extent of the harm that's done in the impact area. But adjacent to it is a strip of land near the highway where most of the base facilities are. That land is technically under the trusteeship of the state of Hawaii, leased to the U.S. Army for $1 for 65 years. And the Army really wants to hold on to that so that their training area at Pohakuloa is intact and complete. There are 3 sites that the Army has on Oahu. Makua Valley, the lower portion of Makua Valley, where it's attached to about 4,000 acres in the back of the valley under executive order, some slivers of land that they condemn for private owners, and so they claim that in fee, and then about 800 acres along the coast and the lower portion of the valley, which is under this same type of $1 for 65-year leases. And then there's a parcel in Wahiawa, which goes in central Oahu, that goes up from near Wahiawa town up into the ridge of the Ko'olau Mountains. And that's about another 4,000 acres of land that is not really being used. And then 2 parcels up in Kahuku that on the northern part of the island, which one of them is connected to the Kahuku training area, and the Army wants to hold on to that one. But they've so these are now expiring in 2029, and the Army has undergone an environmental impact statement process, which they're reviewing. Their proposal is to retain some training lands, and they've studied the possibility of retaining all of it beyond the 65-year lease. The terms of the lease say that the lease expires in 2029, so it's not a renewable lease. That means they have to negotiate something else. They have to figure out some other thing. And there's been enough awareness built, there's been enough resistance from the community that it's become a very contentious and politically untenable position to retain all of it. So there's been, when the environmental impact statement came up before the State Board of Land and Natural Resources, the first one was
World
for
Beyond War is a global grassroots
law,
network advocating for the
on Hawaii Island. The state rejected the environmental impact statement. They said it's inadequate. It did not do all the things that is required for a state level environmental review process, which I don't know, puts the Army in sort of a quandary, because they sort of need that to be accepted in order for it to proceed with a renegotiation of some sort of an arrangement. On Oahu, that environmental impact statement came up for the Board of Land and Natural Resources a few weeks ago, and they also rejected the EIS for similar reasons. So basically, the staff of the departments did their job and said, this thing doesn't meet our criteria for an environmental impact statement. And so the board did the right thing and rejected it. Now, the concern, though, is that the Army's been talking about doing some sort of a land swap. Instead of trying to negotiate a new lease, they would rather own the land somehow. And that way, it would avoid having to comply with state environmental laws and land use laws. Right now, most of these lands are either conservation, or I think there's a few parcels in Kahuku that are agricultural. And so once the lease ends, that land use designation applies to the land, and military training is in conflict with conservation zoning. They cannot do what they want to do with the land as long as it's conservation. So they have a dilemma. Even if they could negotiate a new lease, they would not be able to do the stuff that they want to do there unless those laws were changed, those land use designations were changed. And so they're kind of in a quandary, and they're trying to negotiate some other kind of thing where they might swap some lands for training area. Now, Pohakulo is the one they really want on Hawaii Island, because they've been concentrating their training there, and it's a bigger space, and it's more remote. And so that's the one I think that's their must have in their mind. On Oahu, when the EIS came back, the final environmental impact statement, we were kind of surprised that they recommended their preferred options were letting the lease expire at Makua, letting the lease expire in Wahiawa Poamoho, and letting one of the two parcels expire in Kahuku, but trying to retain the other one because it's contiguous to their training area. So I think that they're realizing that they can't have it all, and there's too much kind of public resistance to and anger at the military impacts, that they're wanting to look more as land that needs to be managed, that land that needs to be cleaned up, and they have all kinds of people breathing down their necks. I think they see it as like cutting some of their losses and then trying to retain the stuff that they really want. So that's the fight going forward, is figuring out, of course, all of it should come back. It's not their land. It's not even the state's land. The state is only a trustee. And so this is an ongoing fight. And I've been really happy with the turnout. It wasn't clear how many people were following the issue, but hundreds of people came out to these hearings over and over again and testified very passionately. And so that's I think it's an indicator that one, the conditions of these leases were just outrageous, and people realize that now and are saying enough of it. Two is that people are also realizing the full extent of military impacts beyond just the environmental harm and the cultural sites, but also the spillover into our communities. Such as violence against women, which is a kind of an ongoing problem at sites with military bases, but also the social impacts, things like how these military housing allowances create an unfair playing field in the housing market and help to make Hawaii less affordable, allow military families to outcompete local residents who don't have housing allowance subsidies. So it's skewing the economics of being able to live in Hawaii. And I think finally people are starting to talk about some of these things. But the other factor that I think was important in this present moment is the fact that in 2021, the Red Hill fuel tanks had a catastrophic leak. About 20,000 gallons of jet fuel spilled out and got into the Navy's water system and poisoned the water for about 93,000 users of the Navy's water system. Luckily, it did not get into the municipal board of water supply system, which would have affected far more people. But 93,000 people got affected. About 6,000 went to the hospital with various kinds of ailments, ongoing lawsuits, and tort claims against the military. A $1.2 billion lawsuit by the Board of Water Supply against the Navy because they've soiled the water source for Oahu, basically, and created all these other costs for the Board of Water Supply to have to explore new wells and figure out ways to mitigate the harm to the aquifer. So that has been an ongoing problem, but we were successful. I think the mobilization that happened in between 2021 and 2022 was strong enough that, and the situation was so dire that Secretary of Defense Austin decided in March 2022 to close the tanks permanently. And so it's been a several year process now of fixing all the problems with it so they could remove the fuel. And now they're sort of cleaning up the mess and figuring out how to decommission portions of the pipelines and what have you. But the concern is that there's still this term of beneficial reuse in circulating. They have not, the Navy has not committed to completely, closing this thing down. They're looking at like, well, we got these big facilities, maybe we can use it for something else. So I think that's a concern that many of us have, is that there's actually no reuse. These mountains should not have been excavated. They are actually, I think they present a risk of collapse at some point. And so they should be filled with something that's inert, gravel or sand, in a way that does not allow it, that prevents it from collapsing and causing more harm, but also prevents its reuse, the temptation for other kinds of use.
Indeed, and as you mentioned, for people that may not know, each one of these 20 tanks is 20 stories tall, and they were dug out in one of the mountains here on Oahu. So the inside of one huge mountain, part of the range there, is hollowed out. And while it has steel tanks, the steel tanks are the things that leaked, so they aren't so strong. Well, Kyle, we're right at the end of our time here, and we want to thank you so much for your overview of what's happened here in Hawaii and the Western Pacific. Thank you for all of your dedication of years with the American Friends Service Committee, with Hawaii Peace and Justice, and now as your educational time with the University of Hawaii. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. I think that gave us like an overview on what's happening on Western Pacific and what's happening on those areas that has the military bases, what's happening on the Red Hill. So I think Kyle explained it very clearly and give us the vision on what is really happening at the Western Pacific and its militarization activities. And to give us like an overview, like a picture of what's happening on those islands in Hawaii, we'll show you a short clip overview of a documentary of one of the Hawaiian island. It's located on the western tip of it. It's called Oahu, Makawa, and it has been a long refuge for Kanaka Maoli, or the native Hawaiians. And it's one of the last underdeveloped valleys on the island of Makua, and has been a home for the houseless, the unemployed, the working poor, those underprivileged people in the communities, and those who want to live Hawaiian lifestyle of their ancestors. But however, due to the location, their location, it's also one nearby or located at the U.S. military bases in there. So the beach residents, they're struggling to survive, and would like to showcase with you like what Kylie was telling about the Western Pacific and how does it look like for the local people there, for the native Hawaiians. So allow me to show you a little bit of documentary of Nakua Valley.
I'm witnessing my own bird, and there's nothing I can do about it. She's just gone, just like that. Oh.
Well, Makua Valley is one place that the military took from the community, from Hawaiian families in 1941, soon after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And not only did that displace that community from their livelihood, from the places that had cultural meaning to them, because of the military activities, the native forest has burned maybe over 200 times over the years, and they've littered that valley with unexploded ordnance, everything from 1,000-pound bombs to cluster bombs that have rendered parts of that valley inaccessible because of the risk.
We gotta stop this. This has to stop. We can't go for generations and generations with the same thing occurring. We gotta help her. We gotta stop the bombing. We gotta stop the fires. We gotta stop it all.
With Malama Makua, we were able to get access agreement through court.
There was a lawsuit that we actually we won. We asked if we could have 2 accesses a month plus makahiki and overnight, opening and closing.
And it was very contentious at the beginning, but we started doing community access. So you get a chance to experience and imagine what it was like 1,000 years ago. What sounds would you hear? What would you smell? What activity would be here? What were the people doing?
Makua is the safe haven, ironically so, obviously, because Makua has not been made safe. Like pretty much everybody that I know has gone there to seek safety and comfort and to be held in the worst of times.
Makua is definitely a healing place. I mean, it's her own mana for sure, but I think that the way that we hold cultural access, we have been able to create a safe environment for people to have their own experience in Makua.
After the lawsuit, the Army had to do an EIS, and if they didn't finish the EIS, they couldn't train. They still haven't finished the EIS, so that is where it's at. It's been 20 years, no live fire in Makua.
The military's leases of these Hawaiian trust lands, they are leased for a term of 65 years, and they expire in 2029. And so I think right now, what's important for the community to understand is that we have a rare opportunity to begin working towards the return and restoration of lands.
Malama Makua, we're right there, we're in it, and we're gonna help that change happen because that's part of our Pico of Peace model. Peace is not passive. It's not something that's just like over there we go reach in and get some piece of something we got to promote, and that promotion means that we got to take action. So we got to mobilize, organize. We have a plan and we're going to move on it. You guys are welcome to come.
My sense is the Valley is calling us out to stand for justice and to really work for peace. That's the energy that's going to carry us forward, as we get these projects of restoration up and off the ground. The future for Makua, I think, is going to get brighter and brighter. And then that all ties into the future of our community, the future of our archipelago, of the Hawaiian nation, and ultimately of the world.
With Makua, it's not going to end when the lease is in. When we get it back, it's going to take 7 generations to clean up. This is a sandstone, and what would be done is that it would be using water to polish. I never got to that point. So how many whacks? I don't know. And how long to get Makua back? Not important. It's one hammerstone hit at a time and one slow polish at a time.
I hope you had a glimpse on what's happening in Makua. And here now joining with us, Anne Wright, who prepares everything for Western Pacific. Thank you for being with us here, and for preparing this amazing segment for Western Pacific. So far we just have the march and the talk with Kelly and the Makua, and I think you will have your presentation.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Michelle, for holding down the fort while I looked a little disheveled because I was actually at the grocery store. I got the wrong day. I thought tomorrow was the day we were having it. So thank you all very much for going ahead and running the video with Kyle Kajihiro this morning. He and I had a long conversation that you saw, where he really outlined so well all of the issues that we are facing here in Hawaii. And while this is called the Peace Wave, the very first video that you saw, which was of the Peace March in honor of the sovereign nation of Hawaii that was taken over by the United States, annexed by the United States. That's where we start, that this was an independent nation. It was a peaceful nation, and the United States took it over, annexed it through violence, through a coup that was done by U.S. businessmen here. And since then, the Hawaiian Islands have been a scene of militarization. And as Kyle so strongly represented in his comments this morning, and then this trailer of a wonderful documentary that is being made about the citizen activism in Makua Valley, that it's 20 years now that there's been no live fire going on in Makua Valley because the citizens brought lawsuits against the military. And as you saw in the video, the numbers of times that there have been wildfires through the valley that were started 20 years ago by U.S. military firing. Well, what I'd like to do is to follow up just a little bit from what Kyle mentioned in his talk with some more specifics, and I'm going to try to show, no, that's not the one. Let's see, let me bring up the, I'm looking for my PowerPoint, just one second, and we'll have that. And hopefully, there we go. I think, can you see the PowerPoint?
Not yet. Would you
Okay.
like me to share it from my end?
Okay, if you can. It's I'm sure it's easier for you than it is for me. I can go back though and see if I can get this to go. Let me just see. Okay.
You would like to try, Anne, to share
Well,
your
Okay, let me try it one more time and
Okay,
then,
let me just stop sharing from my end.
all right. Thank you so much. Well, we thank you all who are putting all of this together for us, all of the things that it will. Let's see, now I think we've got it. Okay. Now, can you see that? The Indo-Pacific Command?
Yeah.
I think
Yes.
Cora says that she can see it. Great. Okay. Well, we saw that particular slide with Kyle as he was explaining the breadth of the U.S. military expansion over the Pacific. And I just wanted to mention that we do have YouTubes about this land back campaigns in Hawaii that he spoke about, where we're trying to get land back of the 65,000 acres for 65 years for $1. And that one, I'm putting it up there so that you all can, at your leisure, look at that one. But then I just wanted to say again that, as Kyle mentioned, the Board of Land and Natural Resources rejected the Army's final EIS on the attempt of the military to maintain control of these lands that they had leased for $1. And as you can see, the citizen activism that we have there of people, and this was, I believe, at the state capitol itself, where people were making their banners to hold up there to make sure that our legislators and the various elements of the state government knew how outraged we as the citizens were about the thought. Nobody really realized that all of these acres had been leased for 65 years for $1. $1. So when that finally came out, there was lots of anger about it and a real push to get those lands back. And here is some of the information about trying to get these lands back. 1,100 acres in one training area, nearly 5,000 acres in another training area. And then over in Poakaloa on the Big Island, the big training base that is between the two volcanoes on Big Island, 22,000 acres that we're trying to get back from them. And then the areas of concern of why the EIS was rejected by the state finally. Normally, the state of Hawaii takes whatever the military gives out, they just take it. But this time, we had some really good people in the state government who analyzed this environmental impact statement and said it's failing in so many ways. And one of the ways was that it didn't even include the known archaeological sites on these military lands, or lands that had been taken by the military. It didn't do much work at all on the biological resources that are there. It didn't note the streams that went through those areas. So those were some of the areas of concern. And another thing that Kyle mentioned in his talk was the horrific jet fuel contamination that happened 4 years ago when 22,000 gallons of jet fuel escaped from one of the 20-story tanks that had been dug out of one of the mountains here that is overlooking Pearl Harbor and then the expanse down to Honolulu back during World War II. And one of the biggest engineering processes of World War II is kind of like Hoover Dam. I mean, it was a massive engineering process to dig out in these volcanic hills spaces where you could put a 20-story tall tank in it, and not just one of them, 20 of them. So hundreds of millions of gallons of jet fuel were stored in those during World War II. And the people of Hawaii didn't even find out that these tanks were in those hills until the 1990s. It was a national security secret. But what was not so much a secret was that there kept being leaks, and people were wondering, where is this fuel coming from? Because Pearl Harbor sometimes would get a sheen over it. Well, it was because these tanks that now are 80 years old, they were started back in World War II. And anybody that's 80 years old knows there are leaks in everything. And those tanks were no exception to it. In fact, the steel had gotten so thin that it was less than the width of, if you put a dime down, and the width of a little tiny dime, that's all it was. And so there were leaks that were everywhere. Well, so 22,000 gallons went into the drinking water of primarily the U.S. military housing areas, although there were some civilian areas close by those military housing areas that also were polluted. And as Kyle mentioned, 93,000 people were affected by this, and many, many families are suffering really, really horrific problems with the ingestion of jet fuel. Well, finally, the military families and civilian families have sued the military for the medical damages that they received. And now the Board of Water Supply of Honolulu is suing the Navy for $1.2 billion for the problems that they have caused the state of Hawaii. It's a 100-page civil tort complaint that's really, really interesting to read. And we want to make sure that during this peace wave, where we are talking about peace, but we're also talking about how our own nations and their work undermines peace, and it undermines peace in our own communities, where we have major environmental impacts because of the military, and this jet fuel contamination by the Navy at Pearl Harbor is one of the horrific examples of it. Another very interesting thing that's going on right now, and tragic thing, is that the largest construction project for the U.S. Navy is now in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And it's the building of a $3.4 billion dry dock, which will be used for nuclear submarines repair. So far, we have not had nuclear submarines that have been home ported in Hawaii, nor have they been repaired. But this is one of the things that's starting to happen here. So we wanted to bring that to your attention, as in the United States, where the budgets of so much of our national budget is being slashed, but the military budget is not being slashed at all. And as Kyle mentioned in his talk, the talk about a pending war with China, which is something we try to stop, even the talk of it, because it's just so outrageous that we think that having a war with China would be a good thing. So that's what we are trying to do now, is to bring all of these things to the attention of our own citizens in the United States, to put pressure on our elected officials. So far, it's not been working. I'll say that. I've spent a lot of time in Washington myself, in the U.S. Congress, particularly on trying to stop the U.S. complicity in the genocide of Gaza, but it is not working. But that doesn't mean we stop. We just keep going with it. We keep going. Well, one of the things we'd like to show you about the militarization of the Hawaiian Islands is the area of the Big Island that is this giant training area, which is the largest one in all of the Pacific. It's called Puakaloa, and we have a video that we'd like to show you so you can see the expanse of it. So let's do the one, Now That You Know, Do You Care? Thank you, Michelle.
Just
Since the beginning, Hawaiians have existed as part of the living universe. For generations, families lived in harmony with nature. This harmony is being destroyed on what some would consider the most sacred place on the island. Pohakuloa lies in the center of Hawaii, embraced on one side by Mauna Loa, on the other by Mauna Kea.
This particular ahu sits as a marker on this pu'u. We're in this pu'u called pu'u kole. We're right in the energetic piko in the center of the island. There's an energetic lines around north, south, east, west, and it's encircled. And they used to walk these lines just to maintain the energy of these particular lines on the island.
But this living heart of Hawaii Island is under attack. In World War II, the Marines were the first to use Pohakuloa as a training area for live fire exercises until the mid-1950s when the Army took over. Pohakuloa is vast, 133,000 acres, most of which is ceded land. Hawaiian Kingdom government land and private crown lands of Queen Liliuokalani taken at the time of the overthrow. Presidents and Hawaii state governors handed these lands over to the Army for their training area. Additional large tracts of ceded land under the control of the State Department of Land and Natural Resources is leased to the Army at the cost of $1 for a 65-year period. Although the Army's lease for nearly 23,000 acres is set to expire in 2029, they are currently negotiating with the state to extend the lease to 2078.
The installation itself is run by the U.S. Army Garrison Pohakuloa. It's really a minimal staff, but they cycle a lot of troops through there.
They've used all kind of weapons up there. Even B-2 bombers from Guam fly here and bomb at Pohakuloa. It's every branch of the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, that attack Pohakuloa.
Biannually, RIMPAC training exercises converge on Pohakuloa with 22 countries participating in active war games. At first glance, it seems an ideal location, uninhabited, with plenty of maneuvering space, and tucked away enough to be out of sight and out of mind. But not for everyone. People who have been there and families who have ancestral ties to Pohakuloa say it's not a barren place of lava rock and cinder cones.
Umi was one of my ancestors. Umi built heiau in the area of the mountain. He built Ahua Umi, and he built another heiau at Pu'uke'eke. There are other sites in the area that's really beautiful and things that and areas that should be preserved.
There are many tunnels throughout Pohakuloa, and there are many of our artifacts. It's our iwi.
And I was amazed at some of the trails and things was out there. There's like some gulches that go down, and they built stone bridges across the place.
This is really pre-contact type sites. In addition, there's also a number of sacred mountains surrounding Pohakuloa, as it occupies a large portion of the Saddle region, and there's also smaller but significant pu'u in the area too.
There has never been a full archaeological survey of these sites, and that, they say, is unacceptable.
I've talked to cultural monitors that have driven through Pohakuloa and could see artifacts sticking out of the caves. That kind of desecration, is sacrilegious.
There's no way to place a price on cultural sites. It's a priceless resource that cannot ever be replaced.
Desecration of sacred sites is not the only problem. There is deep and growing concern about the possible health risks to the troops training at Pohakuloa and those who live in surrounding areas. The controversy involves a radioactive heavy metal called depleted uranium, or DU. DU is what's left over after uranium is used to make fuel for nuclear reactors and weapons. Today, it's used to make armor plating, missiles, bombs, landmines, bullets, and shells.
The military discovered that when you take these metal slugs, just straight depleted uranium, fire them at high speed, and they pierce, say, a tank, on impact they will explode at 3,000 degrees, and they themselves are very explosive. Now, when you do that, what happens to the uranium? Half of it settles back down on the ground and half goes into the air. So all of a sudden you got this aerosolized uranium.
I live about 20 or so miles away from Puakaloa. I can still feel the ground shake and hear the thunder of the artillery. So every time I hear that, I cringe, thinking of the depleted uranium dust coming up into the air and coming down into the people in Kona.
In and of itself, depleted stuff is not that dangerous, but alpha particles, emitters within your body, are the most deadly form of radiation of all. It is stopped by your skin, but in your body, it will mutate your DNA more so than any other kind of radiation. If it doesn't go into your gene and goes into the stomach or the brain, well, that's your problem. You might get cancer, you might get problems. But if it goes into your genes, you kind of bought the farm.
In 2007, after years of denying it, the Army admitted it had been using DU in some of the weapons deployed at Puakaloa. And in fact, the DU was still present in the live firing ranges.
As far as the depleted uranium goes, it's been there from the 1960s. They're not really sure where it's located, how much is really there.
I suspect there's a lot of radiation up there, a lot more radiation than the Army wants to admit to.
The Army did its own studies, and in a 2008 report outlined in a U.S. Army website, came to the conclusion that, quote, there is no imminent or immediate threat to human health from the DU present on Hawaii's ranges.
A lot of the people, except the UK and the US, which have a conflict of interest here, consider depleted uranium weapon of mass destruction, unintended target, legacy for on and on.
The Army, for instance, has been somewhat reluctant to tell the truth. For many, many years, upon being asked, the story was there is no DU at Puakaloa, as there is no DU at Schofield. Lo and behold, it's announced, yes, we have had DU, we have done these things, but it's minimal. And the DU we have is, quote, safe.
I mean, I don't have a whole lot of faith when it's coming down. I mean, a common sense person would say, why we have the guy with a conflict of interest doing his own quality assurance?
We have the county council's resolution in 2008 saying that there should be an unbiased report, an unbiased study, an independent study relating to Puakaloa and the depleted uranium, and nothing has been done about this study.
The most immediate fear is that with the continued shelling, the DU will burn or explode, sending aerosolized particles into the air. How does this affect the families living downwind of the range and even the troops training at Puakaloa?
Yeah, there is a fear of getting contaminated from this stuff, but I cannot leave.
But a key point that the county council called for 4.5 years ago here on this island by a vote of 8-1 was stopping all live fire at Puakaloa until there's a complete assessment of the uranium contamination and cleanup they called for.
For those who say this should not be our fight, there's a parallel battle that is still unsettling. Kaho'olawe. For years, it was known as the Target Isle, bombed and desecrated in the name of national defense. In the beginning, only a handful had the courage and the outrage to speak up in the face of overwhelming opposition, even from the Hawaiian community. Not our kuleana, many said. Don't interfere with the military's ability to do its job. Almost everyone thought it was an unwinnable fight.
But they stood up for what they knew in their hearts was right, was truthful. That these sacred places of our islands are being destroyed. And you cannot just sit around or just stay in silence. You have to speak up.
Kaho'olawe, we finally stopped the bombing on. But Puakaloa, there are people living on this island, and they don't seem to have any regard at all for the health and safety of the people of this island.
Kaho'olawe was being bombed since World War II, and it took those people, was it 1977, I believe it was, the first occupation. That's when it became front and center for discussion. The same with Pohakuloa. We've been trying all these other things, so I think maybe it has to come down to the nonviolent direct action.
The Navy would say in the press conference that Kaho'olawe is a strategic military bombing site, bombing practice area. It's significant to the national defense of the United States, and we need it. But as we've seen, they didn't really need it. Eventually, the island was returned.
But stopping the bombing was just the beginning. We are still trying to undo the devastation caused by years of abuse to the land. Even today, after the federal government has poured millions of dollars into efforts to clear the ordinance, only a tiny portion of the island is safe.
Once that bombing stopped in Kaho'olawe, Pohakuloa really is the central training area here. At 133,000 acres, Kaho'olawe was 28,000 acres. But this is nearly 5 times the size of Kaho'olawe.
It's up to us to ask the questions for all who live in Hawaii. What are we doing to our land, our air, and our groundwater? If no one answers, there could be consequences for generations to come. If we don't push for action, who is held accountable for the health of our families, our children, and for the troops who put themselves in harm's way? If we are silent, who speaks for our culture and the preservation of our beliefs? Remember the lessons of Kaho'olawe. If not for the voices of a brave few, where would we be today? The worst thing we can do is nothing. The biggest obstacles to an acceptable outcome are apathy and inaction.
You can say you don't know, but this is what they're supposed to do, make you know. And if you know, do you care now that you know? And if you don't care, how come? What happened to your cultural dignity? You're supposed to be mad.
Well, that's a pretty good resume, it really tells the story so well of Pohakuloa, depleted uranium, and then the bombing that took place on the island of Kaho'olawe, and where we're trying to get the bombing stopped on Pohakuloa. We have bombers that come all the way from Whiteman Air Base in Missouri that fly all the way across to Hawaii, drop their bombs, and then go back to Missouri. It's used by other national militaries also. It's a place that is not well cared for at all, as you can certainly see. Anytime the military drops bombs on things, it's not well qualified, taken care of. If I could just show my show again, a couple of things that we have on Big Island. Every Friday at the federal building is a protest, and most of the time it has these signs: "Stop bombing Pohakuloa," "Danger," "Radiation," "DU." It's quite a crowd that will go every Friday to Hilo, which is the county capital of the Big Island of Hawaii, to remind people there of what's going on their island. The Big Island also is a very interesting place in that it's been a center for the nuclear-free Pacific movement that was really, really strong back in the 80s. And here is a photo of our Veterans for Peace sailboat, the Golden Rule, that came to Hawaii 4 years ago and ended up staying almost 2 years because COVID happened. And so we were glad to keep the Golden Rule here. And this is where it was in Hilo Harbor with the ancient banner. That banner, "Make Hawaii and the Pacific Nuclear Free," is over 50 years old. And Jim Albertini, who is one of the great activists of the United States, and for sure here in Hawaii, he's had that banner for forever. And I'll just mention some of the other things that have happened, because this is the 80th anniversary of the dropping of the U.S. atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we certainly want to apologize to the people of Japan, and then of other places where the testing of these nuclear or atomic and nuclear weapons had. Well, Hawaii County signed on to a nuclear-free area back years and years ago. But I think it was in 1984 that they actually signed, and then the military said they needed an emergency military exemption to the law, and they got it. Well, Jim Albertini and a couple of other guys who, were back in, I guess, in their 40s at the time, when they heard that a nuclear-powered Navy ship was coming into Hilo Harbor, they jumped in front of it to try to stop it from coming in. Well, they ended up in prison. He was in a federal prison for 3 years for jumping in front of that ship. But that has not deterred them, of course. Now they, in December of 2024, they got the nuclear-free law restored for the county of Big Island. And they, of course, have their signs for Friday afternoon, no nukes there at all. So Hawaii, the Big Island of Hawaii, has been a really, really good place for highlighting all of these issues that we're talking about. And speaking of the nuclear issues, out in this part of the Pacific, the Marshall Islands ended up being the place where the United States tested so many of its nuclear weapons. And Marshall Islanders are still showing the effect of these, the radioactivity that came from blowing up and actually destroying several different islands, and getting the radiation that spread all over that area. We're going to show you a film that's really quite interesting, because it shows how the Marshall Islanders have had to leave their homeland from the nuclear issues and from global warming and climate change and increasing sea levels. So we have a lot of Marshall Islanders who come here to Hawaii for employment and for education. And there's also the largest group of Marshall Islanders who have left the islands have ended up in a place very close to where I grew up in Northwest Arkansas, at a place called Springdale, Arkansas. And there are so many Marshall Islanders there that they have their own Marshall Island government consulate in Arkansas. So let's show this, because it has a lot of footage of what the United States did in the testing of its nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands and the effects of it, and why these people have had to move to Hawaii, Arkansas, and other places. Thank you.
The Marshall Islands are a paradise in the Pacific that the U.S. used to test nuclear weapons.
This is Bikini. It is here that the military and scientific personnel of Joint Task Force 1 will conduct the tests with the atomic bomb.
Between 1946 and 1958, the U.S. detonated 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands, which was
equivalent to 7,200 Hiroshima bombs.
The U.S. basically tricked the Marshallese living on Bikini Atoll to leave behind the little land that they had so that it could be used for nuclear testing. The atomic tests conducted by the U.S. caused forced migration, and
they have health issues like cancers or thyroid.
Since the tests in the 40s and 50s, many Marshall Islanders have moved to the U.S., specifically to Arkansas.
We've been homeless for the last 76 years.
They have settled in the rolling hills of the Ozarks, nearly 600 miles from the nearest ocean.
I think Marshallese, we're our travelers. And, with our tiny islands,
We built those canoes to travel.
Nearly 1/3 of all the Marshallese in the world now live in the US, and most of them live here in the town of Springdale.
Better education, better opportunity. I'd say majority works at the poultry plants.
And now the climate crisis is accelerating this migration.
You're talking about an entire country that could perhaps disappear by the middle of this century.
So how do a people so far from their homeland stay connected to their roots? We went to Springdale, Arkansas to find out how Marshall Islanders came to settle here. This is Sosalina Gibas Madison. She can never go back to her homeland because it's contaminated.
I am sixth generation down, I believe, from the time they took our ancestors from the island.
Sosalina is a representative for the exiled people of Bikini Atoll who now live in the US.
This flag right here is our Bikini Atoll KB flag.
And it's kind of based off the American flag. I see stripes and stars.
Yeah, it's on purpose to remind the US of the damage done to the Bikinians. 3 stars right here signifies the 3 islands that were demolished at during the testing.
In 1946, the U.S. decided to evacuate Bikini Atoll and forced the 167 residents to leave their homeland.
That's one of the reasons why there's almost 4,000 Bikinians here in the States. And I believe whatever happened to us Bikinians has affected all of us Marshallese as a whole.
The U.S. detonated 67 atomic weapons in the Marshall Islands, 23 of them on Bikini Atoll, including the most destructive nuclear weapon in U.S. history, Castle Bravo.
The width of the fireball at this time, about 3 seconds after detonation, was 4 miles.
And it was U.S. propaganda that basically tricked the Bikinians to leave their homeland so that the U.S. could conduct these tests.
Crossroads, scene 26, take 1.
This is a United States military film showcasing how the U.S. Navy requested Bikinians to leave their homeland without any compensation.
All right, now, James, will you tell them that the United States government now wants to attempt to turn this great destructive force into something good for mankind?
The person speaking is Commodore Ben Wyatt. He was the military governor in charge of the Marshall Islands after the U.S. took it over in World War II. Wyatt asked King Judah, the leader of the Bikinians, to leave so that the U.S. could begin Operation Crossroads. The Bikinians were told that this was going to be for the good of all mankind, which is why King Judah agreed to the U.S.'s demands.
We will gladly go, and everything is good, and everything is corrupt. Tell him that's fine. Everything being in God's hands, it must be good.
What King Judah said is actually inscribed on the Bikini Atoll flag.
Wordings on here says, meaning everything is in the hands of God.
So the Bikinians evacuated and left on the Navy ship to a much smaller island.
The ladies are carrying stuff back to the LST-1108 that transported them to Rorick.
Sosalina's office is covered in pictures of the evacuation.
That's Ben Wyatt right there, and King Judah, and other Bikinians.
Sosalina said the pictures are meant to be a constant reminder of what happened to her people.
What does it mean for you that you are from a land that you can't go back to?
I feel like a nomad. It's heartbreaking knowing that we don't have a home to go to.
The exodus is known to Marshall Islanders as Bikini Day. It's something they commemorate every year, even here in Arkansas. We attended an event marking Bikini Day in Springdale, where descendants of Bikini who now live in the U.S. performed songs and dances from their homeland. And they reenacted the conversation between Ben Wyatt and King Judah and recreated the Bikinians getting on LST-1108, the ship that took them from their homeland forever. Many Bikinians didn't know that this move was permanent, that they wouldn't ever be allowed to come back to their home.
I feel like we were betrayed and tricked into believing that what we were sacrificing was for the good of all mankind and for everybody in the whole wide world to be safe.
I had heard of Bikini Atoll in my life only through pop culture. There was SpongeBob who lived on Bikini Bottom underneath the atoll.
We need to get back to Bikini Bottom.
Oh well.
And then there's Godzilla, who the US government apparently tried to kill with a nuclear weapon.
SpongeBob and Godzilla, it's used as a joke to many people. but really it's something more serious and devastated, sad.
The next day in Springdale, we met up with Benedict Madison. Benedict is a project specialist for youth, climate, and nuclear issues at the Marshallese Educational Initiative.
So the Marshall Islands are on average 6 feet above sea level, and we are actually one of 4 low-lying island nations in the world.
Meaning that all the land is at or nearly at sea level.
You're talking about an entire country that could perhaps disappear by the middle of this century. Right now, we're already experiencing the impacts of climate change. We're seeing extreme flooding, droughts.
That drought has made the groundwater on some islands so salty that it's undrinkable.
And then climate change also plays a role in why people are moving to the States. And so when you've got land that's being destroyed, people can't grow crops.
And if they can't grow crops, many Marshall Islanders go to the urban centers to find jobs. But that's been difficult. Youth unemployment is now above 20%.
If they don't find opportunities there, they move here to the States.
The Pacific Islanders who first settled in the Marshall Islands 3,000 years ago were expert sea travelers who braved the vast ocean in small canoes.
Boat building is an important island occupation. No blueprints or handbooks are used in building these fragile outriggers.
The foundation of the canoe is called joj. Joj in our language is kindness, and kindness is really the foundation of a Marshallese person. So that's why it's called joj.
Melissa Leilan is descended from Marshallese royalty, and she showed me what tools her forefathers used to travel.
Many of our ancestors were really good at navigating. They were the best navigators in the world without using any technologies.
The art of navigation has been handed down from generation to generation.
The stick chart, it was used by our ancestors. So this was their tool. By looking at the position of the star and also feeling the swelling of the ocean, they'll know what grids they're at. This was their compass and their map.
Melissa founded the Arkansas Coalition of Marshallese, which helps bridge the gap for the islanders who have journeyed to the U.S.
Well, every time I talk about the Marshallese community here in Arkansas, people just have this odd look like, what is she talking about? A lot of people still don't know about what happened on the islands. A lot of people know what bikini is, then the underwear bikini, but a lot of people don't know that that word actually came from the Marshall Islands.
Yeah, the bikini, the swimming wear, is named after Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. A French designer named it that after he learned about the nuclear tests. And so Melissa says it's not only important to teach Americans about this history, but the next generation of Marshallese as well.
Especially for folks like ourselves who are starting to learn these issues and learn what took place back on our lands and continue that story, continue the legacy, and continue telling our younger generation, because if we don't tell, it's going to dissipate.
Melissa is the first and only certified court translator for Marshallese in Arkansas, and probably all of the U.S., and she realizes that her role here is important.
I was taking juveniles to the court side and saw the need for Marshallese interpreters. Majority of our Marshallese folks who are moving to Arkansas, they're not proficient in English.
But Arkansas isn't Melissa's permanent home.
I will have to go back eventually to assume the role of a royal person, yeah. But I feel the calling that this is where I'm needed the most. And we're talking about nuclear displacement, we're talking about climate changes coming up. What we're doing here is we're creating homes for those who need to move out of those islands.
But how did the Marshallese community end up in Arkansas to begin with? Well, that has something to do with the Compact of Free Association.
The Compact of Free Association is a treaty between Marshall Islands government and the U.S. government.
That's Eldon Alec. He's a consul general of the Republic of Marshall Islands government. So one thing to clarify is that while the Marshall Islands was a U.S. territory when the nuclear tests were being conducted, it's now an independent nation. The Marshall Islands and the U.S. signed a treaty that's usually renewed every 20 years.
It started in 1983, and it's a treaty that allows Marshallese to come to the States indefinitely, to come and work, but at the same time, the U.S. has control over our land and our air.
In fact, the U.S. still has an army base in the Marshall Islands and Kwajalein, which used to be a testing center for ballistic missiles. The next compact is being discussed right now between the US and Marshallese governments. But many Marshallese want more accountability for the nuclear testing, especially when it comes to radiation and cancers.
I am hoping that the US provide enough funds for all the medical issues that we are facing.
But what brought Marshallese people to Springdale specifically? That all began with one man named John Moody.
The story was he came and he worked at the poultry plant here.
He actually went to Oklahoma for college.
John Moody didn't want to be interviewed for this film, but his story is one that all Marshallese know pretty well.
He moved up here to Northwest Arkansas, where he started working at the poultry plant.
And he found out that, you don't really need to speak a lot of English. You don't need to have a lot of skills.
He told his family and friends back home.
We Marshallese would like to follow one another. So everybody just kind of followed each other and came here.
The Marshallese community in Arkansas has grown from that one person to more than 15,000 today.
Since the 80s up until now, we now have that many Marshallese, with majority of them living here in Springdale.
And a lot of them work in the poultry industry. In fact, nearly 1/3 of all the poultry plant workers at Tyson Foods in Springdale are Marshallese. And this grocery store with the pool hall in the back is where they come to hang out after their shifts. The Marshallese community in Northwest Arkansas has gotten so big that they even have their own community clinic and radio station. While more and more Marshallese are moving to the United States, what's important to remember is that the Marshallese aren't U.S. citizens. And so that means they can't stay here permanently. But for most of the Marshallese we spoke to, Arkansas is a temporary home.
My plan is to hopefully go back after college.
The presence of so many Marshallese in Arkansas isn't part of a normal migration pattern. It's caused by U.S. nuclear testing and destruction. And now climate change has made the situation on the islands even worse. And while many would want to go back, some Marshall Islanders don't have a home to go to and are asking for changes to be made in the next compact with the U.S. so that there's a pathway for a safe land for them to live on.
We don't have a place to go. So I'd like to see the U.S. government give us permanent land that we can live.
Well, that's a pretty interesting video, isn't it? Of so many people from the Marshall Islands that have come to the continental United States, and particularly in the middle of the country in Arkansas to have their lives. I haven't heard that ICE has been going after the Marshallese. I mean, they are allowed to work in the United States. They don't have to have a visa. They just have to prove that they come from the Marshall Islands. But I would anticipate that they probably are feeling very, very wary right now of what is going on with other groups that have migrated to the U.S. We would like to show you one other very short video because the other place where Marshall Islanders have come is here in Hawaii. And one of the reasons is it's close. I mean, it's only like 4 hours by flying away, almost halfway across the United States in comparison. It's a long way, but Hawaii has been a stopover point. And because initially the United States government, through the Department of Energy, provided medical treatment and medical surveys for people who had been irradiated through those atomic and nuclear tests. So let me see if I can show this particular short video of Marshallese here in Hawaii. Josie Howard, who is the head of the Micronesian community group here in Hawaii, I had hoped that she'd be able to be with us, but unable to today. But she sends her greetings. So let me see if I can play this. Let's see, share. And let's see if this will work. Just a moment. This is the first time I've tried to do this, so I'm not too sure this is going to work, but it's good practical experience for us all to learn how to do all this stuff. Okay, now. I don't know quite what's happening. Can you see something on the screen?
We see your PowerPoint.
Okay, I think we're going to have to skip this because I can't quite figure out how to get this. Do you see anything there now?
No, I think you have to share that screen instead. So I think just stop sharing at the moment and then share the screen where the video is playing.
Thank you. Okay, I'll stop sharing that one and then
share, then also click the sound just to
okay.
yeah. And then just share that screen.
Yep, there it is. Okay, let's keep your fingers crossed. Here we go.
Perfect. Yep.
Yay! Can you hear it okay?
When Europeans first arrived in Micronesia, they found people who had already been moving in and around these islands for hundreds, even thousands of years. They had spread through 1 million miles of ocean with different cultures, speaking many languages and living in complex societies. Welcome.
Actually, I'm going to move this forward to, yeah, right here. Okay.
The event showed visitors how time and navigation skills had helped Micronesians influence each other's cultural practices and social patterns. One thing all Micronesian island culture societies have in common is that they needed to be well adapted to survive the natural environment. Because of their size, location, and relative isolation, anyone who settled in the islands of Micronesia had to be tough. Micronesian people are well adapted to survive on limited land resources and hot temperatures, unreliable rainfall, and the occasional super typhoon. They need to survive, to cooperate, and to share resources resulted in close, extended families and the strong village ties. Although their languages and local customs may differ, they all share the strong sense of community.
And I think we'll that is really to show you the beauty of all of the wonderful Pacific Islanders who do come to Hawaii for a variety of reasons, most of them economic and educational. But it makes Hawaii a very, very vibrant place with so many cultures and so many wonderful festivals. In fact, earlier this year was, or actually last year, in August of last year, was the Festival of the Pacific, which was bringing all of the Pacific Islanders representatives here to Honolulu for 10 days. And in the convention center, they built villages for each one of the nations that were represented. And it was really, really quite a wonderful, wonderful thing. One of the islands that was represented is a U.S. territory, and that territory is Guam. And as Kyle mentioned in his presentation earlier, the island of Guam has been suffering through a huge, huge increase in the militarization of that island. And we have Dr. Lisa Natividad, who is with the University of Guam, has made presentations all over the place about the militarization. And we are using one of her presentations to give you a view of what's going on out on the island of Guam, the territory of Guam, or Guahan, as it should be pronounced. Michelle, if I could ask you to show that video.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so half a day from the island of Guahan. I'm presenting on behalf of the University of Guam and an NGO called Ihagan Famalawan Guahan, which is an indigenous Chamorro women's organization here on our island. And so I like to begin with discussing where we are. And so as you can see on this regional map in the Pacific. We are, start my video here. We are in the North Pacific Islands, and we're above, if you draw a straight line from Australia, PNG, and continue up, you'll see Guahan right here. We are the southernmost island of the Mariana Island chain. And so to the north of us, we have Saipan and other islands as well. And so this map really clearly illustrates the idea that Guam has been dubbed by the US as the tip of the US spear of military might. And so as you can see, our island here is the center connecting points of a number of different military stages and theaters in terms of military exercise, in so many ways connecting the East and the West. And certainly a critical point in the Asia Pacific and the US's pivot strategy. And so this is a map of our island itself, which is only about 212 square miles. And so to the north, we have Andersen Air Force Base up here. And to the south, or in the southern part, we have Apra Harbor. And this is where the primary naval base is. But it's also noteworthy to mention that our island is occupied about 1/3. So even though we have these two bases on these two corners of the island, there are a number of different military or Department of Defense land holdings throughout the island. And so I'm a native indigenous Chamorro, and our people date back to these islands to roughly 2000 BCE. We've been here about 4,000 years. It's been a while. Certainly have significantly outstayed colonization, which came to our shores in the mid-1600s. And this picture is of Foha Rock, which is a rock that in our cosmology is from which humanity was born. And so just to understand a little bit better about our island, our first contact with the Western world was in 1521 when Magellan kind of stumbled upon us, left us alone for the most part until the mid-1600s when Catholic missions were set up. And then, so we were under the Spanish crown. And then following the Spanish-American War in 1898, we were then through the Treaty of Paris ceded to the United States. We remained in US possession. However, during World War II, for just slightly less than 3-year period, we were a war zone, very famous in the history books for this time period when we were occupied by the Japan Imperial Army. And then in 1944, the tail end of the war, the US came back and reoccupied us to the present. In 1950 was the passage of the Organic Act of Guam in the US Congress, which created a local government of Guam. However, we still remain a non-self-governing territory on the United Nations list of NSGTs, acknowledging and recognizing the colonies that still exist in the world. So our history of colonization, our people have endured this for roughly 350 years, and some would argue that we are the longest colonized peoples on the globe. And so what does being a US colony mean then? There's a number of different things. And so this is a short itemization. We do hold US passports. However, we have no vote for the US president. And our congressional representative, we have a delegate who we elect to Congress. However, that person has what's called no true vote, which means if their vote is a tiebreaker or in any way influences the outcome, then their votes, they meaning our delegate as well as other territories, those votes are then voided. We have limited federal funding. One GAO report out of the US Congress indicated that we receive about 1/7 the funding afforded to states. And we are excluded from a number of US social service programs that include, for example, unemployment insurance, as well as Social Security Disability Insurance or SSDI. And there are a number of restrictive federal territorial policies that limit in very significant ways our ability to develop a viable local economy. And so what has colonial militarism then meant for Guahan? Because we are clearly a US possession as an unincorporated territory of the United States, and militarism is rampant here, right? With the footprint of the US DoD, roughly 1/3 of our island. And so it has meant a lot of different things. And so when we look at what is happening in terms of the US is agenda and its military expansionism into the Asia Pacific region, largely sort of thrusted with Obama's 2011 Pacific Pivot strategy, you see that Guam is a very important piece of this plan. And so the reason given for it, of course, is the containment of China, both economically and militarily. And then you see as part of the pivot, the fortification of bases throughout our region, Guahan included, with the development of Camp Blas, which is a Marine base, as well as not just the development, but expansion of the THAAD to connect to our neighboring jurisdictions, and continued expansion of the existing military bases on the island. In Okinawa, we see the developments in Hinoko and Takai, Hawaii, expansion of Pohakuloa, and so forth as we go down. And so connected to the theme of today's discussions, which pivots around international solidarity, you can see how those of us on these bullet points here, clearly it's strategic for us to work together, because really we are resisting the same source of most of our misery, right? And so prior to this Pacific Pivot announcement was the announcement of transfer of 8,000 Marines from Okinawa to our island. And so that really has spawned a very significant amount of resistance work in terms of the US's military presence and development on our island. I wanted to share a quote from Captain Robert Lee, who is a captain in the US Department of Defense, who stated, "We're seeing a realignment of forces away from Cold War theaters to Pacific theaters. And Guam is ideal for us because it is a US territory and therefore gives us maximum flexibility." And so when he talks about maximum flexibility, what he's really saying is it allows them to do whatever they wish without consent of the people on the ground or our local government, which is essentially what has happened. So as we look at our interplay with the US Department of Defense and the military's legacy to our island, we see a whole lot of contamination environmentally that's toxic, including radiation exposure. When you've got high toxicity, you have poor health outcomes. And then there's also the prohibition of traditional practices, such as access to traditional fishing grounds, the abolition of our language, our spoken language in the school systems, particularly after World War II, and land dispossession, because of course, to develop military bases, you need lots and lots of land. And so that certainly happened here. There is a segregated school system. And ultimately, the more significant we are in terms of the US's military presence, is the inability for us and the sort of hijacking of our right to political self-determination, which essentially allows us to exercise our right to develop our own political identity as a jurisdiction. I just wanted to share this slide here, which shows the radiation exposure radius, wherein Guam lies within direct downfall and downwind of atomic testing from Bikini Island in the Marshall Islands. And so this has a significant amount to do with our radiation exposure and impacts our health conditions. And in terms of looking at environmental contamination, here's one snapshot of time wherein we had 95 toxic sites in the two bases in different stages of cleanup. But I also want to just mention that it's really important to question what clean means through the eyes and lens of the Department of Defense. In addition to those toxic sites listed and exposure to radiation, we also have over 30 Superfund sites, which the US Department EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has deemed as the most toxic sites within the United States. And with all of those, you see disparities in health. And so I just wanted to share the results of a study, an old study that was done in 1997, but its findings wherein they had reviewed death certificates of people on Guahan over a 25-year period. It revealed that the villages, and it's highlighted here in green, of Jigo and Santa Rita had the highest incidence rates. And it is not a coincidence that those are the two villages from which those two paramount military bases are located. And we see the same thing reflected when we look at cancer mortality on our island. We compare the number and the rates of Chamorros, which is our native people in this aqua bar, to the US national average. For these same types of cancer, you can see that we have a very big cancer problem, we being Chamorros who are on Guahan. Washington Post Journalist Blaine Harden said it very eloquently when he talked about his visit to Guahan, saying that, quote, people here grow up with war ringing in their ears as described by their grandparents. And so that just is a little snapshot and glean into how, as a territory, militarism is everywhere. And this is also indicated in this chart here, where it shows that Guam and our neighboring islands, the rate of lives lost to US wars is much higher than the US average, as well as to any of the US states, because of high enlistment rates in the US Department of Defense forces. Land dispossession is a very big problem, especially when our island is so small. And this actually is a aerial photo of our island. And so the Department of Defense controls, as I've mentioned before, about 1/3 of the island, but that also is more than all private line owners combined. And its recent expansion has extended into the ocean and the airspace. And they also control more than our local government of Guam. So they are the single largest landowner of the island. They have English-speaking only policies. This is an example of such in terms of impacting our traditional culture, which was a policy in 1924 forbidding our elders from speaking our language. And so since 2006 and the announcement of this transfer of Marines, even fortified by the Pacific pivot, there's been a lot of community outcry in terms of resistance. All monies of their plans are to be spent primarily within military fences. And we also have had in public forum of the DoD process, or the NEPA process, over 10,000 comments submitted. And our concerns have really largely fallen on deaf ears, which was clearly unprecedented, as reported by the Department of Defense in terms of the community's response. We were given over 11,000 pages to digest in 90 days to respond to their plan. And so that resulted in a lawsuit that was resolved in our favor. And over the years and time, the number of troops that are supposed to be transferred to Guam has been reduced, which we're very happy about. But their larger plan still is of great concern for us on our island. The most recent camp developments has been around Camp Blas, which is the development of the military base for the Marines who are to be transferred. And so we have lots of concerns here in terms of our cultural artifacts and heritage sites, our traditional ancient villages. And so you have latte sites in Lusung, which are pounding stones of our traditional medicine that have been discovered and that are really just being displaced at this point. There's been a violation of a programmatic agreement that's between our local government and the Department of Defense, constant violations, and there's really just no mechanism of holding them accountable when you consider that we are a territory, right? We are akin to that of a modern day colony. And so in addition to that, we have the Hodson Lagu tree, of which this is a picture here. It's an endangered tree. It's the last of its kind in our jungles. And even that was not reason for them to halt their military expansion plans. And so we've resisted. We have an organization called Protegilatexan Save Retidian, also more commonly known as PLSR. We've been holding peaceful protests and working with others in solidarity, international solidarity for peace. And so this here is just a compilation of a number of our efforts. This quadrant here is a local protest that we've had, but on the left side here, we have a picture where a delegation of us have gone to the United Nations, largely reporting on the US and its military expansion plans around military bases, because there exists UN resolutions that clearly state that administering powers are not to have their military bases in their colonies for reasons that will inhibit their exercise of their right to self-determination. And so you can see here other flyers that we've been working on with folks across the globe. And most recently, our solidarity actions in solidarity with the work on, with regards to Red Hill in Hawaii, with Miss Monica Flores here participating in a recent webinar. And so I just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity to share our story and close with this photo of one of our activists here, Mr. Melvin Wampat Borja, carrying our Guam flag together with Aloha Aina, some folks from Hawaii, and Ms. Kazui Akabayashi from Japan here working. This was a
Well, thank you to Dr. Lisa Natividad of the University of Guahan for always her excellent presentations of the history of colonization of Guahan and the militarization of Guahan. We would like to show a short video which puts Guam's location and the rhetoric about a war with China in perspective. And that plus we'll have a song from one of the Chamorros of Guahan and his peace song, and that will kind of wrap up our 2-hour beginning of the 24-hour peace wave. It's getting ready to move across the globe. So please, Michelle, if you could show that next video. Thank you.
To all my cousins and soldiers, I just wish they could be here, defending their culture while the U.S. military's waging war on our land. Sing the threats out there, while displacing our fam. They put lead in our water and fear in our minds. We won't be controlled, we not buying the lies. We feel peace within, from the inside out. Say peace within, from the inside out. Say peace within, inside out. Say peace within, inside out. They say they protect us, let me tell you what the lie is. The U.S. military is driving the climate crisis, releasing more emissions than whole nations around the globe have more than 800 bases, more than any country, making plenty money. Anytime there is a conflict, the 1% makes profit. The CIA plotted the poison which reached Lumumba. What really happened to Uncle Onion? I've heard the rumors. Study the statistics, you know they don't make us safer. Around bases, women and children in major danger, and places where service members are rolling in the streets. Human trafficking and sexual assault rates increase. Is it military training that makes men abuse the power? Rape's the reason Marines got kicked out of Okinawa. They pollute our island and say they the best to guard it. When the presence in our island just makes us the larger target, while the U.S. military's waging war on our land. Same the threats out there, while displacing our fam. They put lead in our water, fear in our minds. We won't be controlled, we not buying the lies. We feel peace within, from the inside out. Feel peace within, from the inside out. I said peace within, from the inside out. Come on up. Peace within, from the inside out. Feel 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 peace within, from the inside out.
Wow, that was some energy, wasn't it? Here's a question for you, Michelle. Do we have time for one more song, or do we need to sign out from this so you all can get ready for the next one?
We could have the last song for to end the peace wave for part 1.
Okay. The one about nuclear winter?
All right. Getting it ready.
I will mention this is a song and graphics that's done by a resident of Big Island. Her name is Linda Williams. She's a physics professor and a chanteuse. She's actually in Europe right now on a singing tour, but she sings songs that help people understand scientific stuff. And she has one on depleted uranium, and she has one on the nuclear winter. Should we not be able to stop our politicians from all of this nuclear weapons stuff? So this last one will be Linda Williams and Nuclear Winter.
Nuke bombs dropped on cities burn. The smoke goes up and up into the stratosphere. Smoke spreads and envelops Earth, blocking sunlight to surface pools. Goes dark and dry, killing plants worldwide and killing off our food supply. Nuclear winter is a self-assured suicide. Nuclear winter is a self-assured suicide. It's not the bomb that kills us all, it's the smoke up in the sky. Nuclear winter is a self-assured suicide. Nuclear winter is a self-assured.
Well, on that happy note, it certainly shall propel us to ban nuclear weapons and have peace throughout the world. And thank you so much to the 24-hour peace wave, and aloha from Hawaii, Guam, and the Marshall Islands. Good night.
Thank you, Anne. And with that, we're going to end our part 1 of the Peace Wave, and we're gonna pass our wave for part 2 for the Western Pacific. So let me just stop recording.